and Kevin Cook.
Terry Rudin will meet there.
There, Jane Seymour's on.
As part of the Arts Office, I have two regional arts coordinators. Fiona Woods, who looks after visual arts, and Tara Conahan, who looks after traditional music. And Fiona is based in the Ennis-Tyman Library in North Clare.
Okay, folks, I'm going to come and get these off you in a little while. This is your lunch menus. Yes.
What makes Ground very special is the fact that Fiona Woods is actually running it, and being a visual artist herself means it is very focused around the individual artist. Now, as part of our county arts plan, we would be committed to placing the artist central to any of the activities that we do. We would have been one of the first, certainly, to be using the term arts in a rural context or rural arts, and to devise a specific programme around that.
When I came into the job, there wasn't a set agenda, so I was able to actually lay out what I wanted to do, and so I identified the whole area of art, public art, but art in rural contexts generally, as being something that I was interested in addressing.
Ground Up is very different. We were probably one of the first to do something as dedicated to and putting the term rural arts as such. To actually adopt that term and to promote an arts programme along those lines.
I'd have to say that its whole character and momentum and even its focus has been completely developed by the artists who participated in it, so it's very much a collective process. And actually, I mean, I think that's reflected in the fact that it's being turned into an artists collective. So once we get to the end of this, it'll actually become the property of the artists who've participated from the beginning. We could have just commissioned temporary works and put them in rural contexts, but one of the things I thought was really important was to sort of generate opportunities for artists to network. That was the first thing, because that's something you really miss, you know, coming from a city, or just, you know, being in a rural context. And also to have a sort of a peer discussion forum, so that people could begin to exchange ideas and not be, you know, just making art in isolation from.
During the break, they're writing up the questions, just because it kind of gives a focus if people want to, you know, to look.
And you knew how to spell aesthetics without any correction?
No, I actually had the thing in front of me. I was writing it. I'm good, but I'm not that good. Anyone want to? I mean, you don't necessarily need an answer, but maybe just something.
So Ground Up, it's kind of an experimental artist-led programme where artists get together and research issues about art in rural contexts or rural contexts generally, or just consider new questions maybe. Probably that's it. It's more about framing new questions about how art can respond to rural contexts.
Initially, 3 pieces possibly were going to be commissioned. We had the option then of working for the research period as individuals or as group. And so what we decided to do was, as a group, we decided to do a smaller group project, and then there was no uptake in terms of people collaborating to put in a joint proposal or anything like that. So it ended up with all of us putting in our own proposals for the commissioned works.
I was asked to adjudicate the first round of Ground Up. Siobhan Mulcahy gave me that task, so I got sent all the proposals and I went through the proposals and I selected three of the artists. Unfortunately, that's all we could select actually, because there was only a certain amount of money. Mm-hmm. So we selected 3 artists to make their work. So that was my first encounter with Ground Up.
Well, that was the brief. It was to address contemporary art in a rural context. And I mean, art is art, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, one of the first things that I think that we all learned in that group of artists was that you couldn't begin to define what the rural audience was for art. It's like any audience, it's very disparate. The only thing that you could safely say with any degree of accuracy was that the amount of exposure that people had in rural areas was far less than people in urban areas. That's the only truism that I would have taken from the whole project.
You know, living in the countryside is an isolating experience for a contemporary artist. Because we're kind of working, I suppose, in relationship all the time to an international, much wider international cultural context in terms of the work practice that we're, you know, attempting to do. And I think being in a rural place, sometimes you can kind of lose out on interactions within that culture, within that much wider cultural milieu that as artists we're hoping to be in conversation with.
And artists always try to get away from the centre, if you like, in ways, you know, this kind of search for inspiration and stuff. But we still, let's face it, like Dublin is the capital. Do you know, Dublin is where everything happens. In that sense, or that would be the perception. You've seen artists move down to different parts of the country, and then, well, artists do what artists do, so they practice.
There are very few opportunities for artists in rural communities to come together, okay, and actually to listen to one another. And I'm sort of totally against the idea that artists have something to say to rural communities, but not the other way around. You know, I'm not interested in a one-way conversation. So it's about trying to facilitate something so that artists can hear. It's really important that contemporary culture begins to engage with vernacular rural culture, and stops sort of regarding it as inadequate and naive and you know, all those things which it does. And the way that's going to happen is that artists are going to start listening to rural communities and taking on board the sort of inherent cultural value, if you like, in what's happening here.
And we were talking, I was talking to some farmers, and one of them came up with this great comment about the landscape. He was saying, you know, in the Clare Hills, around this time of year, September, August, September, when the heather is in bloom, he described it, the sensation of looking at that from where he lived was, it looked like the hills were blushing. And I thought that was a wonderful sort of description of the hills in Clare, and I thought that's my key and that's my starting point. And I set about then thinking about a project that might address that sort of description. I'm very fascinated by aerial artwork or works that take off and leave the ground. And I did a project before that in Dublin with a light airplane and a banner, which was very successful. And I thought this might be a good idea, the notion of taking a plane and flying over County Clare. It meant I could bring a sort of maybe a text-based piece of work to as many people as possible and touch all those kind of isolated corners of County Clare that work normally wouldn't get to. Mm-hmm. And I thought this would be a really good way, really practical way of getting my work out there. I thought of the idea of maybe using a hot air balloon, and I found a company in Wicklow that do they do corporate advertising on their balloons. Mm-hmm. So we arranged to have the text of the Blushing Hills, just the Blushing Hills and nothing more, put on the side of the balloon. And we just let the kind of wind take it wherever it went within this corridor that we were allowed to fly in. Mm-hmm. So we started in. I think we eventually managed to get a field in near Carron Lake, and we got a 22-25 minute flight before the wind brought it down again. But it was quite spectacular, and the whole thing was. What I really liked about it was just the way the balloon moved across the landscape. What I thought was good about the piece was that it was unobtrusive, in a way. It was quiet. It was understated. It was like the balloon itself, kind of ponderous. Mm-hmm. You know, it was there as a kind of a gentle prod to maybe fire the imagination. But there's something about hot air balloons. I mean, I don't know what it is. It's just the shape of them. It's the quietness of them. It's the gracefulness of them. They're you know. I mean, I don't know of anybody who's not impressed with a hot air balloon or can't be but impressed with a hot air balloon. But to be able to do that and then think of the balloon as an artwork. I mean, it's great, you know. some people were saying, you know, would I not do it again? And the answer to that was no. You know, it was a moment in time. If you were there, you saw it. If not, you got the second-hand story, and that, in a way, then became an annex to the work. This notion of the second-hand story of, did you see the balloon, and a certain date with the writing on it and stuff like that. And that's an element that I use quite a lot in my work, for all of my work, because all my work is very site-specific and very time-based, and it's not repeated. I mean, it's documented, but it's not repeated live. So I like the idea of people telling stories about the day that they saw the balloon.
The Pink Sheds project is a project that we commissioned from Fiona Woods herself. Fiona has a huge interest in local architecture, vernacular architecture, and she took what we're all familiar with, the sheds that farmers have on their land, and something that we look at every day but maybe often don't see.
Local farmers allowed me to use their shed for 3 consecutive nights. And I sort of selected the sheds quite carefully, and then I just lit them up with loads of pink light from dusk until they were running on batteries, so they kind of ran down over a couple of hours. And what I was trying to do was I was trying to draw attention to the kind of whole working aspect of farms and the landscape. You know, often people just see the burn and they think, oh, you know, it's that whole tourist package. So I was actually trying to draw attention to the fact that people work and generate their livelihoods from the landscape. And as well as that, I think there's something about the sheds being a sort of almost a sculptural form, you know, a self-created sculptural form in the landscape. And the more you look at sheds, when you start to really look at them, you begin to see all kinds of quirky styles and, you know, personal expressions coming out in the architecture. It's about an experience of standing and looking at something and thinking, oh, you know, it's just like a space out of time in a way, just for a moment, where you reconsider perhaps, you know, your assessment of your life, or you just have a moment in your day where you're just transported for a second to something else, you know. Phillips produced a series of works called Shelters, and they're not permanent works, but they're the most permanent of all the works in that they're still there. There are 3 of them. They're located at different sites around Clare, and what she's done is she's chosen to locate them on the site of the Killini, the children's burial grounds, the unofficial, you know, for the children who weren't baptised.
It's about 2 miles from the village, and it's at the site of Holy Well, which is very ancient. The Holy Well of Tuberbreda, near Crusheen village. To the rear of it there is a cemetery for children and babies that has existed for hundreds and hundreds of years. Clare has more killings than any other county in the country. They're in almost every townland. You find the little killings. And almost all of the ones we visited have, you know, hundreds of stones marking the graves of these little bodies. It's extraordinary, you know, how many people are buried in these places. These are places that aren't recognised by the Catholic Church, by the authorities as such, but they're recognised by local people, and local people still come and bring little gifts and offerings to these unconsecrated cemeteries. These little shelters, there's 3 of them altogether on 3 different sites of Killini around the county, and the intention behind them is to provide a context where people can leave little offerings or little tokens of their respect or regard of the site, where they can, I suppose, gain a form of shelter, a sort of a metaphorical shelter. They represent in a symbolic way what shelter and refuge, what the notions of shelter and refuge express.
There's an invitation in them for people to begin to contribute, you know, to build up their own objects. So that's very much a tradition in Clare, you know, the holy wells, and people leave things, and so that's begun to happen. They're being used as notice boards and all kinds of things by the public.
I wasn't trying to engage with a lot of people, like a big group all at once, or really involve a lot of people. I just dealt with small groups of individuals, like the family that owned the field that this holy well and the Killeen is located on, for example, or one or two individuals, and then I'd go and visit other people in their homes and make, you know, really kind of like good conversations, good relationships happen with people. And it's about people's feelings and the fact that those feelings weren't expressed, and this is an opportunity to express the feelings around this issue. And I think people just, connect with that, and they understand it, and it's not pretentious in a way. It's very, it's human. It's about human experience in the broadest sense, and it's not really trying to be anything special.